Ohio State gets a big commitment from a four-star defensive lineman. The early signing period is today. We'll discuss details about what you can expect from numerous recruits around the country, and we'll discuss pluses and minuses about the early signing period. All that and more in this episode of Locked On Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Wednesday, December 15th in the year 2021, and I want to thank every person out there for making this here podcast their first listen of every single day. For quite a long time throughout the entirety of Caden Curry's senior year, many people were wondering where this young man would play college football. Would it be at Ohio State? Would it be at Alabama? Would it be at Oregon? Even Indiana University made a push, and he even had an official visit at that school. Recently, I even talked to someone that has family ties to Caden Curry's family, and this person talked to Caden Curry's dad, and even his dad didn't know where Caden Curry was going to play the football. And this conversation took place the day that Ohio State lost to Michigan, the same day that Caden Curry won his second state championship to cap off back-to-back junior and senior years of winning the state title. Well, on Tuesday afternoon, Caden Curry put everything to rest when he announced that he was going to play college football at the Ohio State University. Four-star recruit, the third-ranked recruit in the state of Indiana in the 2022 class, the 14th overall ranked defensive lineman, and he is a top 100 recruit. That is all coming from the 247 Sports composite rankings. His sophomore year was a big year for him. Had 100 tackles, 69 solo, 10 and a half sacks, and that was when things started to get propelled. That was when things started to really ramp up with his recruiting. Former Center Grove High School football player that used to play at Ohio State really put a good word in for Caden Curry, and things really started to rapidly go up, rapidly ramp up in regards to interest to Caden Curry, playing collegiate football at numerous big schools around the country. He was attracted to Larry Johnson's reputation for developing his defensive linemen into draft picks and successful pros. One of the big things I like about Caden Curry is that he can play inside and outside. I have seen him in big games last year against the Cathedral Fighting Irish, number 1 versus number 2 in the state, and also a nationally ranked game as well. He played the stand-up nose guard, nose tackle, whichever way you want to shake it, and did a phenomenal job in the middle. And the Cathedral's offense is good. Caden Curry was wreaking havoc and making a mess in the middle of that offensive line for Cathedral, playing inside. And that was a shift that happened prior to the season. Coach Eric Moore ended up saying, I need you to play inside based off personnel. And Caden Curry was a team player and played inside. And people got to see a lot of great plays from him from the inside of the defensive line. This year, I got to see him play, I believe, a couple times, 2 or 3 times. He shifted from inside D-line to outside D-line. And so you're going to get a player that is right now 6'3", 250. I'm getting his height and weight from 247 Sports. His Twitter bio ends up saying 6'5". Of course, we're going to get exact height and weight very, very soon once he's on campus at Ohio State. But you're getting a player that is versatile. And that's one thing very, very big and something that I believe Larry Johnson wants. He wants defensive linemen that are versatile. If you can play inside, great. If you can play outside, great. Larry Johnson's already told him he is going to play either both inside and outside, just depending on the defensive line, just depending on personnel, depending on what the opposing offense is going to throw at Ohio State. And I do believe this is a great addition to the recruiting class of 2022 for the Ohio State Buckeyes. He is the second best defensive line recruit in the 2022 class with 4-star defensive end Kenyatta Jackson Jr. And Ohio State has been the fourth-ranked school nationally via 247 Sports 2022 recruiting class rankings as far as how good the recruiting class is, where they're ranking them. Ohio State has been number 4, and they're still number 4. Number 1, Georgia. Number 2, Alabama. Number 3, Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher continues to do good things via recruiting down there in Texas. Number 5, Penn State. Number 6, Texas. Number 7, Notre Dame. And then number 8, the University of North Carolina. I don't know what is going out there in Chapel Hill, but they have been doing a lot of good things via the recruiting, and Mac Brown has been whipping up something in his lab. Hopefully, very, very soon, they will have the success they had last year, not so much the results they had in 2021. I firmly believe this is a big deal. If you want to look at some stats, I remember I mentioned earlier that Caden Curry had 100 tackles his sophomore year. His numbers really didn't jump tackles-wise or sacks. They were pretty much similar, a slight dip. But his tackles really didn't jump up a lot from junior and senior year. Actually, it was a slight dip. But I do believe that was because he got a lot more attention from opposing offenses, offensive lines, opposing offensive coaching staffs, and that's why there was a slight dip in production tackle-wise, but that does not mean he was not productive on the field. When he had 61 tackles his junior year, he had 8 sacks his junior year as well, 42 solo tackles his junior year. This year, his senior year, 65 tackles, 35 of them being solo, and then he also had 7 sacks his senior year. He played 14 games his senior, junior, and senior years. He played 13 games with 2.5 sacks in his freshman year. This is huge. This is big. I have been waiting until this announcement was going to come forward. I had a feeling that it was going to be Ohio State for quite a long time, not from inside sources or not from things that I talked to people about or things I have read. Just had a gut feeling. Just had a real gut feeling. A guy that I believe wanted to play be in a defensive line that is a 4D lineman set. I just had a weird feeling. Sometimes they happen to where I just have a feeling that this guy's going to go to Ohio State or going to go to this school or that school. That's how it is with Caden Curry. Can't wait for him to get on campus. Can't wait to see what he does at the Ohio State University very, very soon. Thank you for tuning in to Locked on Buckeyes, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every single day. Once again, I want to thank you for making Locked on Buckeyes your first listen of every day. And make sure to check out the Ultimate College Football Playoff Preview 2021. Local experts, betting advice, and draft analysis. The most comprehensive college football preview begins this Friday. That preview begins this Friday. But what begins today and what is going on right now, probably when most of you are listening to this podcast episode, is the early signing period. For the longest time, I was under the assumption that this was something that had to happen, or players had to sign national letters of intent. They do not, but there are benefits to them signing them today. We'll talk about them down the road. But the early signing period is today, December 14th. It used to be in the new calendar year at the conclusion of the season, but due to people really having some really important conversations, they decided to make an early signing period, and that is in the middle of December. Signings can begin at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is why I mentioned a lot of you will be listening to this, and there will be signings already coming in. Ryan Day will address the media at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. There is a ceremony for Sonny Styles. He will discuss his reclassification from 2023 to 2022, and he will be signing his national letter of intent, and he will be just answering different questions I'm sure people have about him going to Ohio State and other stuff involved into him joining the Buckeyes early. There are 19 verbal commitments that Ohio State currently has. All but one of them is expected to sign their national letter of intent. 2 5-stars, 15 4-stars, and then 2 3-star recruits. Terrence Brooks is getting a late push from the University of Texas I know a lot of you might have a sore spot for the University of Texas right now, with Quinn Ewers recently committing to play football at the University of Texas. A lot of NIL money coming his way. Boosters talk, money talks, and I do believe that's part of the reason he has decided to go to the University of Texas to play collegiate football next year. Well, Terrence Brooks is one of them that is getting a late push by the Longhorns, and that's one that's up in the air. Only 2 defensive linemen recruits have committed in this class. That is one thing. Kenyatta Jackson Jr., we talked about him earlier, then Caden Curry, who just committed a day ago. Those are 2 things. Those are 2 guys that are big, that are pivotal. But I don't believe Ohio State only wants to have 2 defensive linemen in this class totally. Now, this is the early signing period. There is another signing period that is going to happen in the beginning of next year. And so this period is big for a lot of these individuals. But Ohio State will still be hitting that recruiting trail and hitting the phone calls and everything that goes involved into recruiting, because 2 defensive linemen, I don't think that's ideal. I know Ryan Day has different plans and different benchmarks he wants to hit when it comes to different players and how many players are in each position group for each position class. I'm curious what we're going to see next as far as who else will be joining this 2022 recruiting class that's a D lineman very, very soon. A couple names to watch that are not committed but could be committed very, very soon. Hero Kanu, he might silently sign his announcement or national letter of intent, and then he will announce it January 8th at the All-American Bowl. And then Omari Abor, he is another individual that is a name to watch as far as could he commit? Could he come to Ohio State? Could he go somewhere else? So on and so forth. Remember how I mentioned that the national letter of intent does not need to be signed? It's just something that there's a benefit to the athletes if they sign it early. I am reading this right from the National Letter of Intent website, literally nationalletter.org. Frequently asked questions. I had no idea this was even a full website, but as I was preparing for this episode, I ran across this website, and I think this information is very beneficial. But we're going to discuss why I think the early signing period is a good thing for collegiate athletes. Some bad, possibly, but this is a really good thing if you're a top athlete. The question, am I required to sign a national letter of intent? No, you are not required to sign a national letter of intent, but many prospective student athletes signed because they want to create certainty in the recruiting process, specifically by signing a national letter of intent. You agree to attend the institution for 1 year in exchange for the institution's promise in writing to provide you athletics financial aid for the entire academic year. Simply by signing a national letter of intent, you are given an award including athletics aid for the upcoming academic year, provided you are admitted to the institution and you are eligible for athletics aid and athletics aid under NCAA rules. Furthermore, by signing a national letter of intent, you effectively end the recruiting process. Once you sign a national letter of intent, a recruiting ban goes into effect, and you may no longer be recruited by any other national letter of intent school. That is a great thing. I mean, think about it. If you're Sonny Styles, if you're CJ Hicks, if you're Caden Curry, if you're Kenyatta Jackson Jr., and you are being sought after and being pulled in every which way by all of these different schools, yes, a verbal commit is one thing. But until it's set in stone, until they can't come after you, you're going to find that there are going to be schools, coaches that will just be poking and prodding and poking and prodding because, hey, they have most of their class already put together. If they can add you to the fold, that would be huge. Many people out there, if you're on Twitter, follow me at jsteven07. I'll try to do as much as I can on Twitter throughout the day while I'm working and while I'm just trying to enjoy the day too. Make sure that I'm keeping up to date with those that sign, when they sign, and everything else that goes into this particular day. This is huge. This day is big. Numerous players, they have already put a verbal monkey or obstacle off their back. But once they put pen to paper and they solidify that thing via pen to paper and ink, hey, all bets are off. Nobody else can touch them, and so on and so forth. And they can go on and really just focus on finishing up their senior year of high school, because I'm sure they still have finals to take, or if they're going to go on and play in the spring at their high school, maybe they have another sport to play, or they just want to finish their senior year with their boys in high school, so be it. But then there's going to be some players that as soon as they sign, they know the next big date for them is when they join the Ohio State football team to join the football team in January, and then to get into their workouts and to begin spring practice. Different athletes, I'm sure. We mentioned Sonny Styles. We mentioned Caden Curry. Some other athletes that you will be hearing sign national letters of intent. That's the plan. That's the expectation for today. Devin Brown, quarterback, recently commitment from Utah. Caleb Burton, wide receiver. Caleb Brown, wide receiver. Keon Graves, wide receiver. Tegra Tishabala, offensive lineman. I always stumble over his name. Kojo Antwi, wide receiver. Dallin Hayton, committed, I believe, in the summer. Running back. George Fitzpatrick, offensive lineman. Bennett Christian, tight end. Avery Henry, offensive tackle. Kai Stokes, he's a safety. Ryan Turner, a cornerback. Jair Brown, corner. Gabe Powers, linebacker. And that is everyone that is there. Terrence Brooks is the one that I did not mention. Once again, that he is expected to silently sign and then announce on January 8th at the All-American Bowl. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Locked On Buckeyes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Want to remind everybody about some good, fun things coming up here on the podcast. Tomorrow, the plan is to have Corey Thompson from the Scarlet and Great podcast to join us. We'll talk about some things going on with the football team and how coaches handle some different things going on with the football team specifically. On Friday, the plan is to have a preview of this Saturday's basketball game against the Kentucky Wildcats. Jack Grossman from ESPN 680 in Louisville will be joining us to preview that. He does a phenomenal job of covering and following Kentucky basketball, Louisville basketball, and Indiana basketball. He was with us last year. He'll be with us again this weekend on Friday. A great way to end the week, a fun show previewing a big matchup for the Buckeye basketball team. The early signing period, we already talked about one big thing that's a benefit to the athlete, which is signing the national letter of intent. Even though they don't have to sign that thing, a big plus is so that they can officially, concretely put to pen and paper the end of their recruitment process. There's a recruit in Indiana that ended up committing to Kentucky, didn't sign his national letter of intent, and then all of a sudden, I heard he's a number one ranked recruit in Indiana as well. I heard, Alabama's making a push at him, and other schools he is showing interest in after committing verbally to the University of Kentucky. Until that thing is put in paper, people can still come after you. We have seen people commit, decommit, and then sign that paper and then be locked in after they commit to a second school after that decommitment. Until that thing is done, this is a phenomenal way for those athletes to end and to just get that monkey off their back. But if I'm a coach and looking at pluses and minuses of the early signing period, for Ryan Day, you're going to see a lot less moving around, not just because it's bowl practice, but he's putting his focus right now very soon to the Rose Bowl, the bowl game. I mean, if you're on Twitter, if you're just following on these different sites that cover the team at a full-time basis, you're finding and you're seeing, well, there's an article about Ryan Day going here and Kerry Coombs going there. And it's Coach Stugg going down to Florida to talk to a Florida international transfer. And you're going to see all of these guys going around and flying around doing all of these in-home visits. A lot of these are, hey, we want you. You're not committed yet. We really want you. The one that mentioned the Florida international transfer, he's an offensive tackle, I believe 6'6", 320. Offensive tackle, I do believe that would be a huge get. Also, would be a project, not somebody like some transfers where they want to play immediately. I believe it's someone he's transferring up from a group of five to a power five, one of the elite schools if it happens. And it's someone that he has 3 years of eligibility left. So I'm not sure, just me thinking, I don't think he's thinking he's going to play next year. Just me if he transfers to Ohio State. I don't think it's next year. I think he knows get to know the team, get to know the program, get to know this level of college football, and then in the second and third year left on his eligibility, hey, go out there and wreak havoc, baby. Wreak havoc all day long. A benefit to coaches is ending some of the speculation they have, the uncertainty they have about some of these athletes simply decommitting. If they sign in the middle of December, yes, you're probably going to still go out there and recruit because your recruiting class is not complete. You're going to try to get athletes. Like I mentioned, Ohio State still wants more defensive linemen in this recruiting class. So I wouldn't be surprised if Larry Johnson, Ryan Day, and some other coaches are still recruiting defensive linemen specifically. That would not shock me at all. But for the most part, your recruiting for this particular class is done. The recruiting is never done. You're always going to be recruiting, always going to be looking ahead to future players, future classes. But for the most part, this is done. And I think for Ryan Day and for the coaches at Ohio State, the earlier that ends, the better, because it allows them to put their focus on the Rose Bowl. I mean, think about it. If you have to worry about recruiting elite players at a high level, knowing that so many other schools and coaches are going to be coming after them at the same time as you're preparing for a bowl game or a playoff game, think about that little part of your brain and part of your to-do list that is, well, how do I weigh this? How do I prioritize this day? Is it recruiting? Is it practice? Is it practice? Is it recruiting? One thing checked off, it's amazing. For the athlete, it's huge. It just lets them really, I don't know what that was. Siri started talking and I heard something through my speaker. I think we're back in business. For the athlete, it's big. I think one thing where it might hurt people, where it might be a negative for the early signing period, I've listened to a podcast recently earlier today, and they were thinking that the early signing period is not the best thing for coaches because we've seen two things recently. One, we have seen a lot of coaches move and a lot of coaches getting hired earlier, getting fired earlier, getting hired earlier than normal. And I do think, one, it's a byproduct of the early signing period. Two, it could also be because of the ability and freedom that players have to transfer at will. The only really restriction that I know on recruiting is you get a free one-time transfer outside. And there's timing to that as well. Outside of that, after your 1 year, and if you transfer out after that, you have to sit out 1 year. The old school way was you had to sit out 1 year automatically. You could get deemed immediately eligible after an appeal process, and so different things that go into that. But that's not the way things are currently right now. With players being able to move freely, with coaches getting fired earlier, that changes things for the early signing period because now coaches are now athletic departments, they're not only worried about filling in their head coach, they're also worried about trying to retain the players they have currently on the staff. I think it's a byproduct of the early signing period. There's pluses, there's minuses. I firmly believe for the athlete and getting that thing off their back and getting that thing signed as early as possible is huge. A verbal commit's one thing, but it's nothing like putting that bad boy from pen to paper to solidify where you're going to play your collegiate football for at least the first year you are eligible and you're on campus somewhere in the U.S. of A. Great show, fun show. Early signing period is today. Be on the lookout for a lot of good things coming up as far as athletes, where they're signing, what it means, so on and so forth. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. You can send all of your emails to jstevens317 at gmail.com. We will be back on Thursday and Friday to close up the week, wrap up the week before your Buckeyes face off against the Kentucky Wildcats in Las Vegas, Nevada. For Jay Stevens, this is Locked on Buckeyes. Have a great rest of your day.